Beam me up, Mr. Scott. G'day everyone, my name is Rob from Conceptualize.tech and welcome to this Blender tutorial looking at particle systems to make a teleportation. It can also be used for other things like this firing synapse. The same kind of particle system parameters can be used for it. But today we're going to be making this monkey so you can follow along and beam up your own monkey. So let's get into it. Okay, so you can start up a new Blender file, and the first thing I'm going to do is go to Blender Render up the top and change it to Cycles Render. And I'm going to delete the default cube and the lamp. And I've got my screencast keys on so you can follow along in what I click down here, because I'm not going to tell you exactly what I'm going to click every time. This is more of an intermediate tutorial. I'm not going to go through every basic attribute of Blender. There's plenty of tutorials on YouTube that go through the very basics of Blender, so we'll just go through it semi-quickly and I'll try and explain things along the way. So first things first, I'm going to add in our Suzanne monkey, and as I said, this can be used for any sort of object. We're just going to be using a particle system that we then animate using keyframes, but it will work for any object that I can think of really. So I'm going to add, for our monkey, just to make it look a bit nicer, I'm going to add a subdivision surface on it, and it smooths it out a bit, but to just get it completely smooth, I'm going to go over here to shading and click smooth. So that's all I'm going to do for our monkey in terms of mesh. I'm going to click 1 just to go to the front view, and I'm going to snap my camera to this view. So I'll do Alt Control 0, and that's our camera setup for this animation at least. So we have our monkey. The only other object I'm going to put in is a UV sphere, which will become our particle system object. So at the moment it's not smooth like the monkey. I'm going to come over and to our shading again and click smooth. And I'll put that up the top just so that it's out of the way when we go to animate it. Now I'll pull this out a bit so I can see. So we got our monkey. Now I want to add a particle system. So with the monkey selected, I'm going to go over to the particle system tab and add a new particle system. We're going to be using an emitter particle system in this tutorial, and for the number I'm going to only use 4. No, I think I'll go high. I'll go 15,000. Now be aware that I have a graphics computer with a graphics card, so that my computer can handle 15,000 particles in a simple animation. If your computer doesn't have good parameters for rendering, it'll look pretty good with 4,000 or even 1,000 particles. I just think it looks a lot better with more particles. So yeah, just be careful with your computer's performance. It may take a while to render otherwise, or it may even crash while rendering. So for the particle system, I want particles to be emitted from frame 1 to frame 50. So I'll change this 200 to 50, and the lifetime I want to be 200. So this just means that the particles will be emitted from 1 to 50, and the particles will be visible until 200. So it's basically saying the particles will be alive until the end of the animation, because I'll cut it somewhere at 80 or so. So I don't want any particles to disappear. So I'm going to leave the emit from the faces. It should be fine, but I don't want an even distribution, and I do want it to be random, so I'll click random here. Velocity I'm going to leave alone. Now I'm going to come down and skip physics for now. I'll come back to it in a second. I want to click on the render tab here. I want to click object, and I want to add my sphere. So now we should have a sphere emitting. So that was just down the render tab, click object and add the sphere, which we already have here. Now if I click start, we're emitting a whole bunch of spheres, but you can see that they're not right, they're way too big. So up in the physics tab that I skipped before, I'm going to turn this down to 0.01. So now there's plenty of spheres and they're very small. I'm going to click and drag this random size all the way up just about to 1. That'll do. I don't want it to be 1. because that also means that the particle size will be 0, and so there'll be less particles, and I don't really want that. So the only thing I might do is add some brown in, just to give it a bit of a random motion. Hopefully that'll be okay. The other thing I want to do in the render tab is click emitter here. This means that the emitter won't be visible when we render, which is what we want, and you'll see later when we do some compositing that we don't want the monkey to be visible, and we'll just do a bit of render layers later on. So we have our particles and they're blowing out of our monkey, but they're going down, so they've got gravity, which we want to go against. So there is a way to turn the gravity off, but I've decided not to do it for this. I prefer to use force fields, and there is a way to do the force fields in the particle system settings down here, force field settings, but I found it to be not so easy to use, and I really prefer adding in my force fields and so that I can see exactly what I'm doing here, rather than in the particle settings. So if you want, you can use it down here, but I'm going to put it, add it in here instead. So we have our particles emitting from our monkey, but I'm going to add a force field down here of wind. And I'll move it down so you can see exactly what I'm doing. I'll scale it up a bit just so it includes all the particles. And I'm going to go with my wind selected. I'll go over to the physics tab and click there. And the strength of gravity is like what, 9.8 meters per second. So if I put 9.8, it should cancel out gravity. So now the particles are emitted from the monkey, but because we've got the wind as an opposite force, they just kind of float around the monkey once they blow out. So what I want from this animation, by the way, you can now see the particle life. So the particles emit from 0 to 50, so they've stopped emitting, even though some of them are still moving. And when it gets to 200, you can see the particles start to disappear. So that's why I set 200. So I'm going to cut the animation soon. But what I want from this animation is the particles to kind of blow out of the monkey and then get taken up. So they're blowing out now, which is nice, but then I want the wind to get stronger and to blow it up. So at frame 30 down here on my timeline, I'll make it a bit bigger so you can see. At frame 30, I'm going to make the strength 9.8. So I just right clicked and added a keyframe of strength 9.8. Because at frame 60, I'm going to make the strength 30. So I right click again and insert a keyframe. So now from 0, I can push play, my particles blow out, and then they get taken up, which is exactly what we want. Now the particles are all gone now in the scene, so it's about 76. So I'm going to cut our animation from 250 frames, which is the default, down here to 80. I didn't like it very much. 80. So that worked now. So now the particles won't die because the animation doesn't run that long, but they all go up. So that's kind of what I want. The particles blow out of the monkey and then they get taken up, but I need it to form into some sort of beam. So to do that, I'm going to add a second force field of a vortex, and I'll move that down. So all these force fields start with a default strength of 1, and if I play it now, my monkey doesn't really blow out as much as I'd like. So what I'm going to do is change this strength to 0 for my vortex until, what did we say the wind was? Frame 30? Until frame 30, I'll have a strength of 0 for the vortex, and when we get to 60, I'll have a strength of 5, and add the keyframe of that. So now, if I play, blows out, and gets taken up in a beam. That looks pretty good. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So now our particles are good, and our monkey and our vortexes and wind are all set. So now we want to set the materials for the our particles, because if we render it now, we just have, there's no materials there. So to put a material on the particles, we need to go to the object that we made as our particle system, which is the sphere up here. So click on that and go to the materials tab. And for the sphere, it's just going to be a very simple material. I'm going to add new, and instead of the default diffuse shader, I'm going to add an emission shader. So if I look at the preview, it's a bit too white. I'm going to have a bit of a blue tinge, so it looks a bit more sci-fi-y, I reckon. Now, for the monkey's material, it's going to be a bit more complicated, so I'm going to need a bit more room. It's not going to be so complicated, but because I want the monkey to disappear at frame 50, we have to do a bit of keyframes, and I want it to give it more of a sci-fi look material. So I'm going to split my view in half here, and I'm going to change this down here. The clock looking thing, I'm going to change to the node editor, and then I'll do down here and click new. So again, I'll delete the diffuse shader and add in an emission shader. And I can't see it because I clicked off the emitter being rendered in the particle system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate my monkey, so Shift D to make 2 of them, and then I'm going to click M and move it to the second layer. This will make more sense when I get to the compositing, because I'll do different nodes and different effects on the 2 different layers separately. So I duplicated my monkey, and because it had a particle system, the particles have followed over there. But for the monkey, I don't want the particle system on the second layer, so I go back to my particle system and click negative. So now I have, on the first layer, I have the particle system with the wind and the vortex, and on the second layer, I just have the monkey. And we can see our monkey if we have a click Shift Z and see our rendered view. It's all white from the emission. So for that, we can fix it or make it look a bit better and get some details if we add a mix shader and a transparent shader. So it's getting there. One node that I found kind of looks good for sci-fi looking materials. If we go add an input and add a layer weight and add facing and click to the tab there, layer weight kind of gives the edges of the material, the second material here. So at the moment I've got them the wrong way around. The transparent is at the bottom, which means the edges of the monkey here are transparent, and the middle is emission. So if I swap them around, we get the other way around. So the middle is transparent and the outsides are emission, and that gives it kind of a cool look. So I want to change this setting here, the blend, to 0.1, just so it gives the monkey kind of like a ghosty kind of look when it's being turned into particles. So as I said, I wanted the monkey to disappear. So to do that, I'm actually going to add another mix shader and another transparent shader. That's the emission one, not that one. This one. So since we have particles coming from 0 to 50, I'm going to want so the mix shader will give us all transparent and then all the material we made over here. So until 50, I want it to be transparent, so I add a keyframe there with my setting it up with the timeline, and then I can go to 0 and go all the way to 0 for that. So then the monkey will slowly disappear once it gets to 50. And that's kind of what I want, because I don't want the particles, the monkey to still be there while the particles have stopped coming out, because it's meant to show that the monkey has then disappeared into particles, and if it's still there, it'll look strange. So that's it for the material for our monkey. You can see it here. I'll make it a bit bigger so you can see, just so you can copy that and make your material there. And the mix shader again was 0 to 50. So at 0, the fact here is 0, and at 50, the fact here is 1. So it shouldn't be too difficult for you to copy that. Great, so the only thing I want to do now is I still have the background color of gray, and if we go to, if I hold shift and click both layers down here, we'll get our particles and our monkey. You can see I'm at frame, what frame am I at? 33, so the monkey is getting close to being disappeared and the particles are coming out, which is what we want. But I'm going to change, it looks a lot cooler if the background is black, so I'll go to this world tab here, and I'll make this, I won't click nodes or anything, I'll just click to the color and make that black. And there you can see, since I'm still in rendered view, you can see the particles are coming out. If I click later, the monkey will have gone somewhere. Okay. So we have something strange going on with the particles, and this happens quite a lot if I'm just clicking from timeline in the timeline somewhere. Don't panic so much if this happens. This is just kind of like a caching problem, I've been told. So where the Blender hasn't really caught up. We can fix this by going back to the beginning, either clicking on 0 or clicking this button back here and then pushing play, and it will kind of fix our caching problem, and then it should be fine. So the particles are still acting as they should. So now we can have a look, monkey's there, beam's going up, looks nice, good, good, good. So everything looks good now. So this is kind of the end of the, I guess the usual Blender, or the default mode of Blender. So now if you wanted to render your animation, you could, but I'm going to do some compositing just to make it look a bit more sci-fi. And there's only going to be simple compositing. I'm only going to put a bit of blur on the particles and a bit of blur on the monkey as well. And that's why I've got the monkey on one layer, as you see, and the particles on the other layer, which aren't here in 0, but they're there. So what I need to do in order to do that is go to the render layer tab up here and add a second render layer. So the first layer has our particles, so I'll change that to particles, if I can spell it right. And the second layer I'll change to, say, monkey, just so I don't confuse myself later. So the particles, we have to say that we're on layer 1, and the monkey we have to say we're on layer 2. The only other thing I'm going to do for the particles is I'm not going to use the environment. Not that we have much of an environment anyway, but in general, if I put blur on something that's the only thing in the animate or in the render layer, I usually don't use the environment, just as a normal thing. The only thing I will say here, when you're going to render an animation, is make sure, so we have our particles on layer 1 and our monkey on layer 2, but our scene needs to have both layers. So otherwise, if we just have one scene, it's only going to render the monkey. Let's say in this case, since I only have scene 1 on, scene 2. But if we have both of them on, it's going to render both. So that's an important thing to consider. So to do the compositing, it's always best to kind of have a test render first, just so you can see what you're doing while you're adding the nodes. And I want to have test render a frame where both the monkey is visible and I've got particles. So I need to pick somewhere in the middle. If I pick like 35, no, maybe a bit less. Okay, that's good. What's that? 23. So if I test render this, I'll just go to my render tab and click render, just so I can have a quick look at it. So there's my particles and there's my monkey. So I had both scenes on, which is good on me because usually I forget. Now I can go up here and choose compositing instead of the default. And this is what the compositor will look like. And to be honest, I was very intimidated when I first got to compositing, and I put it off for quite a long time to do compositing, but it does make your renders look so much better when you get the hang of compositing. And we're only going to do very simple compositing, so it should be very easy to follow, and hopefully I can describe it well enough so that you understand a little bit about it. So from our default view, let's say, I'll click this use nodes and click the backdrop. The use nodes so that we can see what we're doing, and the backdrop will be, once we add a viewer output, it'll come up behind us and we can see what we're doing. So first things first, the most important thing about doing some compositing for an animation is that your end, once you're finished with your nodes and whatever, they need to be connected to the compositor or the composite node. Otherwise the animation, when you render it, won't take into account that you have done any compositing, or even worse, it'll give you just a blank black. So to avoid even falling into the trap of moving this with what I'm going to add in is the viewer node. So normally you would say like, oh, I need to look at it so I can add these together. I mean, it's kind of going on both now, which is good, but sometimes you move this off and then you can still see it, so you forget. What I'm going to do is hold shift and cut across this, making a new kind of node, and then add there. Just so now I can see what I'm doing, but I know that if I forget, if I would have forgotten, then I'm still safe when it comes to the animation, and I won't have wasted all my time when I render it. So first I'm going to duplicate our render layer here with Shift D, and then I'm going to put our monkey as the second layer here. So like I said, it's only going to be very simple compositing here. It's mainly going to be putting some blur on, but I'll go kind of slowly just so you can follow along. The blur is in filter. I'll click blur and add in my blur. If I click just on where the line is, it'll add straight in. Now I want to have this option here as fast Gaussian. It doesn't change so much, but it makes it look less intimidating for you at least. So the type of blur, I want 20, oops, I want 20 and 20. And you can already see what kind of a difference that's making. But I know from doing this before that I want it to be a bit brighter. So I'm going to make color and put RGB curves and click that right next to it. And add a little bit of brightness. Just a little bit. Just so that the blur has a bit of brightness. So what we've got here now, each particle has been blurred 20 and 20 in both directions, but we want to really see the detail of these particles. If you look here, we want to see that detail. So a way to have the particles detail plus the blur is you add a color mix node, and you change this. What I'm going to do is add the render layer on top of the blur basically. If I grab this image tab here and pull it all the way to the image, I can see now my particles. So it's a mix. I can mix it like this, but the easiest way to do it is to just change it from a mix to a screen. And there we have the blur, but we also have the particles, the detail, or the sharpness of the particles is there too. I'll just pull this back a bit. So that's all I'm going to do for the particles. And hopefully you'll agree that it looks a bit more sci-fi. For the monkey, it's going to be a little more complicated. I'm going to copy or duplicate the blur tab. I'll move it down next to the monkey. I'll click them together. And I'm going to add some keyframes because I want the monkey to kind of, at the start, look very solid, and then I want it to blur while it's being made into particles, let's say. So to do that, I'm going to come down here. At the moment, this is a 3D viewport. I'm going to change that to timeline. And at 0, I'm going to, so I'm not going to have any blur in the X direction because the particles are kind of being brought up in the Y direction. I'll keep the X at 0. And what's going to happen is the Y axis for the blur, I'm going to increase over time. So at 0, I want it to be 0. So I can right click and insert a keyframe, just like we did before in the default. And then at frame 50, because that's when the monkey will disappear, I will make that 60. And when I add the keyframe there, that's all I'm going to do for the monkey. What you need to do is add the two together. So I can duplicate this screen node and click it onto this line between that and the compositor and viewer, and then click the image from the blur, the output, and put it into the input of the screen. And I can't see it, and that's probably, there we go. I didn't know I could even see it if I change the timeline. Okay, cool. So you can see that our monkey is changing. It's strange that the particles don't change. And you can see it's going from a solid object until you can't see it anymore, which is good, which is exactly what we want. So now that that's done, we can go back and start our render and just change our render settings a bit. So I'm just going to make sure that just before you render a particle system animation, make sure that it's cached properly. As I said before, sometimes a particle system, like it's doing now, I don't know, it's still, well, I'll push play anyway just to make sure it's still going right. Just to make sure it's cached properly. There's been multiple times where I've rendered animations for particle systems and they just end up everywhere because Blender has done something weird and not cached something properly. So it's looking good, so we're done here. So just to set up your particle settings, render settings, I'm going to use my GPU because I have one. I will make the resolution 100% just so it looks good. I'm going to, I'll put it in temp, and I've got it as the file format is a PNG. This is probably best for animations because it renders every frame of our animation as a PNG, and then later you can compile them into a video. Whereas it's very easy, I mean, you can stop a PNG render anytime and then start again from where you left off, and you don't lose the whole early render you had. If you did let's say AV RAW, AV JPEG, you can't stop and start again. You'll have to re-render it all again. So it's usually better to do with PNG, I find. The sampling render at 128 is probably okay for this. Doesn't need to be that high quality. The only thing I will mention is this seed setting. Always have it on. It basically means that the noise for the animation will be randomized for each frame. So it makes animations look a lot better, and the noise is just really obvious if you don't have it on, and it makes animations look better. So as a general rule, I always have that on. The only thing else I'm going to change down here is my performance. Since I'm using my graphics card, I'll change it to 256 tiles. If you're using a CPU, then 64 is fine. It's just a way to make it faster. So yeah, we are now at the end, so we can animate, and then I'll come back when it's finished with the final render. Okay, so we're back and our render has now finished, so we can have a look at how we did. So we go up to this render tab and click play rendered animation. And so we can see our monkey that blew out with particles and then get taken up by the force field into beam-like fashion. So that's exactly what I wanted to show. So you can see that the monkey there blurs out as time goes on into, it kind of gives it a nice transition, gonna give that extra sci-fi kind of look where the monkey is actually disappearing into particles. So perfect. Hopefully you've enjoyed this tutorial and you got a similar result, and you can use it for something cool to impress your friends. If you liked it, like it on YouTube and follow us and subscribe to us. We'll be doing more tutorials that are more science-based as time goes on. Also check out our website conceptualize.tech for all the latest news and renders and animations that we've been doing. But other than that, I'll see you next time.